The champagne bubbles danced in crystal glasses around our dining room table. 40 guests celebrating my wife's 37th birthday like she was some kind of royalty. Rina stood at the head of the table in her designer dress, the one that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, basking in the attention she craved like oxygen. "I want to thank everyone who made this year so special," she said, her voice carrying that practiced sweetness she used for clients at her interior design studio. The candlelight flickered across her face, casting shadows that made her look almost beautiful again. Almost like the woman I married 12 years ago, before the lies started piling up like autumn leaves. I sat there nursing my untouched champagne, watching her performance with the detached fascination of a man studying a snake behind glass. 6 months of surveillance had taught me patience. 6 months of following Tuesday routines, checking GPS coordinates, and photographing storage units had prepared me for this moment. This year brought so many wonderful opportunities, Rina continued, gesturing toward her mother Faye, who beamed with maternal pride from across the table. The studio expansion, the new clients, all the Tuesday wellness sessions that kept me grounded. Tuesday wellness sessions. That's what she called them now. I almost laughed. Her best friend June sat to my left, wine glass trembling slightly in her manicured fingers. June knew. She'd known for months, maybe longer. The way she avoided eye contact during family gatherings, the nervous laughter when Rina mentioned her Tuesday schedule, the quick subject changes whenever I asked innocent questions about my wife's routine. And of course, Rina raised her glass higher, I'm grateful for my wonderful husband Finn, who gives me the space to grow and pursue my passions. Space to grow, pursue passions. The euphemisms rolled off her tongue like honey. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against hardwood floors. The sound cut through the warm chatter like fingernails on a chalkboard. 40 faces turned toward me, expecting the dutiful husband's response, the loving tribute to his successful wife. "Including the man you've been visiting every Tuesday?" I said, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent room. June's Merlot exploded across the white tablecloth in a crimson spray. She doubled over, coughing and sputtering, her face cycling through shades of panic. Her husband David reached over to pat her back, confusion creasing his features. "June, are you all right?" David asked, but his eyes were already narrowing as he processed my words and his wife's reaction. Rina's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. Her mother Faye gripped her daughter's wrist with surprising force for a 70-year-old woman. "What man?" Faye demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Rina, what is he talking about?" The birthday candles continued their cheerful flickering, oblivious to the tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a manila envelope, thick with 6 months of careful documentation. "The man at the Riverside storage facility," I said, setting the envelope on the table between the birthday cake and the flower arrangements. "Unit 247, every Tuesday at 2:15 like clockwork. Rina's father Soren, the Honorable Judge Soren Valden of the Superior Court, reached for his phone with the instinctive motion of a man accustomed to handling crises. But his hand stopped when he saw my expression. "I wouldn't make any calls just yet, Your Honor," I said. "You might want to hear this first." The guests sat frozen, dinner forks suspended between plates and mouths, as if someone had pressed pause on a movie. Mrs. Henderson from next door clutched her pearls. The Johnsons exchanged worried glances. Even the catering staff had stopped clearing plates to listen. I opened the envelope and spread the contents across the table like a dealer showing his hand. GPS printouts with red dots marking every Tuesday location. Time-stamped photographs of Rina's BMW in the storage facility parking lot. Close-ups of a particular storage unit with its distinctive blue door and silver padlock. 6 months of surveillance, I explained, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. Every Tuesday, 2:15 to 4:30. Same storage unit, same routine. Rina finally found her voice. Finn, you're embarrassing yourself. It's just storage for the studio overflow. Design samples, furniture pieces waiting for delivery. Furniture that talks back? I asked. Because I have audio recordings too. The color drained from her face like water from a broken glass. June had stopped coughing but couldn't seem to catch her breath. She kept glancing between Rina and the door, calculating distances like a cornered animal looking for escape routes. "This is ridiculous," Rina said, but her voice cracked on the last syllable. "You're having some kind of breakdown." I pulled out a small digital recorder and placed it next to the photographs. "Should I play the conversation from last Tuesday? The one where you discussed the Cayman Islands account?" Judge Valden's phone clattered to the floor. "Or maybe the discussion about the insurance settlement from 2019, I continued. "The one that was supposed to be impossible to trace?" Faye released her daughter's wrist and stepped backward, her face cycling through confusion, understanding, and horror in rapid succession. "The life insurance settlement," she whispered. "From your first husband." Rina's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor in a spray of crystal and wine. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had held the room frozen. "Kian Marin," I said, letting the name hang in the air like smoke. "Your supposedly deceased first husband, the one who collected $4 million in life insurance benefits before disappearing to Costa Rica." The room erupted in gasps and whispered conversations. Someone's chair toppled backward. Mrs. Henderson made a sound like a deflating balloon. But I wasn't finished. "The same Kian Marin who's been living quite comfortably in Unit 247 for the past 8 months, I continued, "while you laundered his insurance money through your interior design business." June bolted for the door, her heels clicking frantically against the floor, but she didn't make it far. 2 men in dark suits stepped through the doorway, blocking her escape route with the casual efficiency of professionals. "Agent Drake Torrin, Federal Bureau of Investigation," the taller one announced, displaying his badge for the room. "Financial Crimes Division." The second agent moved toward Judge Valden, who had gone gray around the edges. "Your Honor, we need to discuss some probate records you expedited in 2019. Rina made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Finn, what have you done?" "My job," I said simply. "The same job I did for 12 years before I took early retirement. The same job that taught me how to spot insurance fraud from a mile away." Agent Torrin stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of federal law enforcement. "Mrs. Harlow, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, money laundering, and filing false insurance claims." "Wait," Faye interjected, her voice shaking. "I don't understand. Finn, you were FBI?" "Financial crimes," I confirmed. "Specialized in insurance fraud and money laundering. Funny thing about taking early retirement. You keep all your contacts, all your training, all your access to federal databases." The pieces were falling into place for everyone now. Rina's sudden business success, the expensive renovations to the house, the beach property she'd purchased last year with cash, the Tuesday routine that started exactly 9 months ago. Agent Torrin's radio crackled to life. "Unit 247 secure. Subject in custody with $800,000 in cash and falsified documents. Kian Marin, alive and well and thoroughly trapped." June had collapsed into a chair, her face buried in her hands. "I just notarized one document," she sobbed. "She said it was for estate planning." "The fraudulent declaration," Agent Torrin noted, consulting his phone. "We'll need you to come in for questioning, Mrs. Calrin." David stared at his wife like she'd grown a second head. "June, what document? What are you talking about?" But June couldn't answer through her tears. I looked around the room at the faces of our friends and family. Shock, disgust, disappointment, betrayal, every emotion except surprise. Deep down, some part of them had known something wasn't right. The expensive lifestyle that didn't match the business income. The secretive phone calls. The Tuesday routine that was never quite explained. "The beach house," Faye whispered, understanding dawning in her eyes. The one you bought last year. It was purchased with... Fraud proceeds, I finished. Along with the studio expansion, the new car, and probably half the furniture in this house. Rina stood there in her designer dress, surrounded by the wreckage of her carefully constructed lies, and for the first time in months, she looked genuinely small. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I suspected something was off about 6 months ago," I said. "The financial patterns didn't make sense. Too much cash, too many unexplained deposits. But I didn't know about Kian until I followed you to the storage facility. You followed me? Every Tuesday for 6 months. GPS tracker on your car, surveillance from the coffee shop across the street, telephoto lens for the photographs, standard investigative procedure." Agent Torrin stepped between us, his presence a reminder that this was no longer a domestic dispute. "Mrs. Harlow, you have the right to remain silent." As he read her rights, I noticed the unsigned anniversary card still sitting on the kitchen counter, the one I'd bought 3 weeks ago but never given her. 12 years of marriage, and it had come to this. The catering staff stood frozen in the doorway, unsure whether to continue cleaning or flee the scene. The birthday cake sat abandoned, its candles burning down to colorful wax puddles. "What happens now?" Faye asked, her voice small and lost. "Now the federal government recovers its money," I said. "The insurance companies get their settlements back, and everyone involved faces the consequences of their choices." Judge Valden had found his voice again, though it sounded 20 years older than it had an hour ago. "Finn, the probate records, I had no idea they were fraudulent." "I know," I said, and I meant it. "But you expedited them without proper verification. That's going to be a problem." The weight of his judicial career hung in the balance. Disbarment proceedings, ethics investigations, the destruction of a reputation built over 30 years on the bench. Agent Torrin finished reading Rina her rights and gestured toward the door. "We need to go, Mrs. Harlow." She looked back at me one last time, mascara streaking down her cheeks, the birthday girl transformed into a federal defendant. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said. "Yes, you did," I replied. "You meant for it to go exactly this far. You just never meant to get caught." The house felt different after the agents left with Rina in handcuffs. 40 guests had scattered like startled birds, leaving behind half-eaten cake and whispered promises to call later. The catering staff finished cleaning in record time, their efficiency fueled by the desire to escape the scene of federal arrests. I stood alone in my dining room, surrounded by the detritus of a birthday party that had become a crime scene. Evidence bags had replaced gift boxes. Miranda warnings had replaced birthday songs. The champagne had gone flat, but then again, so had my marriage. My phone buzzed with the first of what would become dozens of calls. Local reporters, curious neighbors, family members demanding explanations. I turned it off and poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon, the good stuff I'd been saving for special occasions. This seemed special enough. Agent Torrin returned an hour later, alone this time, his federal authority replaced by something that looked almost like sympathy. "Hell of a way to spend your evening," he said, accepting my offer of bourbon. "Hell of a way to end a marriage," I replied. We'd worked together for 8 years before I took early retirement. Drake understood the particular satisfaction of watching a long investigation finally pay off, even when the personal cost was higher than expected. "How long did you really know?" he asked. "About Kian? 3 months? About the fraud? I started suspecting last Christmas when she bought her mother a $20,000 necklace with cash." Drake whistled low. "Interior designers don't usually deal in that kind of cash flow." "Exactly. So I started paying attention to the financial patterns. Large deposits that didn't correspond to client payments. Cash purchases that exceeded her declared income. The Tuesday routine that started 9 months ago. I walked to the window and looked out at the storage facility across town, its security lights creating small pools of illumination in the darkness. Unit 247 was probably crawling with federal agents by now, cataloging evidence and building an airtight case. The GPS tracker was overkill, Drake said. No such thing as overkill in financial crimes, I replied. You taught me that. He laughed, but it sounded hollow in the empty house. I also taught you to maintain professional distance from your cases. This stopped being professional the moment I realized my wife was the subject. The bourbon burned pleasantly as it went down, warming the cold space where trust used to live. I'd spent 6 months building a federal case against my own wife, documenting her crimes with the same methodical precision I'd once applied to strangers. The storage unit was the key, I continued. Once I had photographic evidence of her Tuesday visits, everything else fell into place. Bank records, insurance documents, the probate files that Judge Valden expedited. Speaking of Judge Valden, he's going to have problems. I know, but he's not the real target here. Drake consulted his phone, scrolling through what looked like arrest reports. Kian Marin is singing like a canary, gave up the entire operation within an hour of arrest. Smart man, stupid criminal, but smart man. According to his statement, the whole thing was Rina's idea. The fake demise, the insurance fraud, even the storage unit arrangement. That surprised me, though it probably shouldn't have. Rina had always been the planner in our relationship, the one who thought 3 steps ahead and calculated angles like a pool shark. What's his story? I asked. Gambling debts. Owed money to some very unforgiving people in Atlantic City. Rina suggested the insurance fraud as a way to clear his debts and start fresh. And she got her cut by laundering the money through her business. 50-50 split, according to the bank records we recovered from the unit. $2 million each, minus what he's already spent on his Costa Rica lifestyle. I thought about the beach house, the studio expansion, the designer clothes and expensive dinners. Tainted money, all of it, purchased with the proceeds of a carefully orchestrated fraud. June Calren? I asked. Notarized the documentation without asking questions, claims she thought it was legitimate estate planning. Probably true. June's not smart enough to be a criminal mastermind. Drake finished his bourbon and stood to leave. We'll need you to come in tomorrow for a formal statement. And Finn? Yeah? I'm sorry it worked out this way. After he left, I walked through the house that no longer felt like home. The living room with its expensive furniture purchased with fraud proceeds, the kitchen with its imported granite countertops and commercial-grade appliances, the master bedroom with its king-sized bed and his and hers walk-in closets, everything tainted now, everything connected to crimes I'd spent 6 months documenting. I found myself in my office, staring at the files I'd accumulated during my investigation. 6 months of surveillance photos, financial records, GPS coordinates, and audio recordings. The complete destruction of my marriage, organized alphabetically and stored in manila folders. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. I'd forgotten to turn it back on. Finn, it's Faye. Rina's mother sounded like she'd aged 20 years in the past 4 hours. I don't know what to say, she continued. I had no idea about any of this. I know you didn't. The beach house. We spent last Christmas there. The grandchildren played in the sand while we cooked dinner in that beautiful kitchen, and all of it was purchased with stolen money, I finished. I'm sorry, Faye. I know this isn't easy. What happens to the house now? Asset forfeiture. The federal government will seize everything purchased with fraud proceeds. The house, the cars, probably most of the furniture and jewelry. She was quiet for a long moment. What about you, Finn? What happens to you? It was a good question. I owned half of everything we'd accumulated during our marriage, which meant I owned half of a criminal enterprise. The legal complications would take months to sort out. I'll figure it out, I said. Will you visit her? In jail, I mean. No, I said without hesitation. I won't be visiting her. After Faye hung up, I poured another bourbon and tried to process the magnitude of what had happened. 12 years of marriage, ended with federal arrest warrants and asset forfeiture proceedings. A wife I'd thought I knew, revealed as a criminal mastermind. A life I'd thought was real, exposed as an elaborate fraud. The worst part wasn't the betrayal, though that cut deep enough. The worst part was the realization that I'd been living a lie for months, maybe years, without knowing it. Every conversation, every shared meal, every moment of intimacy had been contaminated by secrets I couldn't see. My phone rang again. This time it was my brother Mark calling from Seattle. Jesus Christ, Finn, it's all over the news here. Federal agents, insurance fraud, arrests at a birthday party. News travels fast. Are you all right? I'm sitting in my house drinking bourbon and contemplating the ruins of my life. So no, I'm not all right. Come to Seattle, Mark said. Stay with us for a while. Get away from all this. Can't. I'm a witness in a federal investigation. I need to stay local until the trials are over. Trials? Plural? Rina, Kian, probably June. Maybe Judge Valden if the ethics board decides to pursue criminal charges. Mark was quiet for a moment. How long did you know? Everyone's asking me that question. Because it's important. Did you know when you married her? Did you know and stay quiet? Or did you figure it out and build a case? I figured it out and built a case, I said. 6 months of investigation that ended tonight. 6 months of living with a criminal. 6 months of living with a stranger. That was the truth of it. Somewhere along the way, the woman I'd married had become someone I didn't recognize. Maybe the change had been gradual, or maybe I'd simply been too close to see it clearly. After Mark hung up, I walked back to the dining room and looked at the table where everything had unraveled. The birthday cake sat abandoned, its candles now just colorful wax puddles on white frosting. The champagne glasses remained where they'd been left, some still holding flat wine, others overturned and forgotten. Evidence of a celebration that had become an execution. I thought about the moment when I'd stood up to make my toast, knowing it would destroy everything. 6 months of investigation had led to that single moment of revelation, the point of no return where truth finally overcame deception. There had been other options. I could have confronted Rina privately, given her a chance to confess and cooperate. I could have turned my evidence over to the FBI without the dramatic dinner party revelation. I could have simply filed for separation and let the federal investigation proceed without my involvement. But I'd chosen the nuclear option instead. Public humiliation followed by federal arrest, witnessed by 40 friends and family members who would never look at any of us the same way again. Why? Because after 6 months of living with lies, I'd wanted one moment of absolute truth. One moment where the masks came off and everyone saw exactly who they'd been protecting, enabling, and celebrating. And because some part of me, the part that had spent 12 years in federal law enforcement, believed that crimes should have consequences. Public consequences. Visible consequences that served as warnings to anyone else tempted to follow the same path. The bourbon was making me philosophical, or maybe just honest with myself. Either way, it was time to stop drinking and start planning for whatever came next. I gathered up the evidence photos and financial records, organizing them for tomorrow's formal statement to Agent Torrin. 12 years of marriage reduced to manila folders and federal case numbers. Outside, the storage facility's security lights continued their silent vigil over Unit 247, now empty of its secrets and its occupants. By morning, the local news would be covering the story. By afternoon, it would probably make the state wire services. Federal fraud arrests in small Maine towns were apparently newsworthy. I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to the master bedroom, then stopped. The bed we'd shared for 12 years suddenly seemed contaminated by everything I'd learned. Instead, I grabbed a pillow and blanket and settled onto the living room couch. Tomorrow would bring formal statements, media inquiries, and the beginning of legal proceedings that would take months to resolve. Tonight, I just wanted to sleep in a room that didn't remind me of everything I'd lost. The house settled around me with the familiar creaks and sighs of a structure adjusting to temperature changes. Sounds I'd heard every night for years, now rendered strange by the absence of the person who should have been sharing them. For the first time in 6 months, I didn't need to wonder where my wife was spending her Tuesday evenings. She was in federal custody, which was exactly where she belonged. The next morning brought reporters to my front door like opportunistic scavengers drawn to a spectacle. I counted 6 news vans parked along my street by 7 a.m., their satellite dishes angled toward clear skies that promised perfect transmission for the morning broadcasts. Federal fraud investigation rocks local community, read the headline on the Portland Press-Herald website. Below it, a photo of Rina being led away in handcuffs, her designer dress wrinkled and her makeup streaked with tears. They'd managed to make her look almost sympathetic. I made coffee and ignored the doorbell, which had been ringing intermittently since dawn. Through the kitchen window, I could see reporters setting up their shots, using my house as a backdrop for their stories about small-town corruption and insurance fraud. My phone had accumulated 37 missed calls overnight. Local news, state news, national news, and what appeared to be several true crime podcasters looking for exclusive interviews. I deleted them all without listening to the voicemails. Agent Torin called at 8:15. "Media circus at your place?" he asked. "6 news vans and counting? It'll get worse before it gets better. This story has everything the media loves: fraud, fake demise, corrupt officials, dramatic arrests at social gatherings." "Wonderful. Can you make it to the federal building by 10? We need your formal statement, and the building has secure parking." "I'll find a way." Getting out of my house without running a gauntlet of reporters required creativity. I slipped out the back door, cut through my neighbor's yard, and walked 3 blocks to the coffee shop where I'd conducted surveillance for the past 6 months. The irony wasn't lost on me. Martha, the owner, looked up from the espresso machine with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Finn, I saw the news this morning. Are you all right?" "I've been better," I admitted. "Coffee's on the house," she said, sliding a large cup across the counter. "And if you need a quiet place to sit for a while, the back booth is yours." I'd spent so many hours in that back booth, telephoto lens aimed at the storage facility across the street, documenting my wife's crimes one photograph at a time. Now it felt like returning to the scene of my own crime, the systematic destruction of my marriage in service of federal justice. The federal building downtown buzzed with activity when I arrived. Agent Torin met me in the lobby, his expression grim. "How bad is it?" I asked. "Kian's cooperation is making this easier than expected. He's providing detailed financial records, communication logs, even video evidence of the planning sessions." "Video evidence?" Apparently he recorded their meetings as insurance against betrayal. Criminals don't trust each other, even when they're sleeping together. That stopped me cold. "Sleeping together?" Drake's expression shifted to something resembling pity. "You didn't know. The affair started about a year ago, according to Kian's statement." I felt something fundamental shift inside my chest, like a foundation settling under unexpected weight. The fraud was business. The affair was personal. Somehow, the combination made everything worse. "How long?" I asked. "According to the timeline we've reconstructed, the affair started first. The fraud came later, after Kian got in trouble with his gambling debts. So she'd rekindled her relationship with her supposedly departed first husband, then helped him fake his demise for insurance money. Love and larceny, wrapped together in a package that had fooled everyone for months." "The Tuesday visits," I said. "Romance and money laundering. She was living a double life, Finn, complete with separate emotional and financial commitments." We rode the elevator to the 4th floor in silence. I tried to process this new information, but my brain seemed to have reached capacity for betrayal. The fraud was bad enough. Adding adultery to the mix felt like being kicked while already down. The interview room was sterile and windowless, designed to focus attention on the matter at hand without distractions. Agent Torrin set up a digital recorder and opened a thick file folder. "This is your formal statement regarding the investigation into insurance fraud committed by Rina Harlow, Kian Marin, and associated parties," he began. "Please state your full name and occupation for the record." "Finn Michael Harlow, retired FBI agent, Financial Crimes Division." "And your relationship to the primary suspect?" "Husband, soon to be ex-husband." The questions came methodically, building a comprehensive record of my investigation. When had I first suspected financial irregularities? What specific evidence had I collected? How had I verified the authenticity of documents and communications? I answered each question with the precision of a trained investigator, compartmentalizing the personal aspects of the case. This was evidence collection, nothing more. The fact that the subject happened to be my wife was professionally irrelevant. "Let's talk about the storage unit," Agent Torrin said, consulting his notes. "How did you first discover its existence?" GPS tracking on Rina's vehicle showed a pattern of Tuesday visits to the Riverside storage facility. I conducted surveillance and identified Unit 247 as her destination. "And you observed her meeting with Kian Marin at this location?" "Multiple times. I have photographs and audio recordings of their conversations." He slid a photo across the table, Rina and Kian embracing outside Unit 247, her face visible in profile, his partially obscured by shadow. "This photograph was taken when?" "Tuesday, March 15th, 2:30 p.m. approximately." "And you recognized Kian Marin despite his supposed demise in 2019? "I ran his photograph through federal databases and discovered the insurance fraud investigation from his apparent demise. The facial recognition match was 96%. The questions continued for 2 hours, covering every aspect of my investigation: financial records, surveillance techniques, evidence authentication, chain of custody procedures, the complete dismantling of my wife's criminal enterprise, documented with federal precision. When we finished, Agent Torrin leaned back in his chair and studied me with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Off the record," he said, "how are you handling this personally?" "Off the record? I feel like I've been living with a stranger for the past year, maybe longer." "The affair bothers you more than the fraud." "The fraud was a crime. The affair was a betrayal. I can prosecute crimes. I can't prosecute betrayal." He nodded, understanding. "What's your plan now?" "Divorce proceedings, asset recovery, figure out what's left of my life after the federal government finishes seizing everything." "The house?" "Purchased partially with fraud proceeds. It'll probably be subject to asset forfeiture." "Your retirement account? Personal savings?" "Separate accounts established before the marriage. Those should be protected." "So you'll survive financially?" "I'll survive." But survival wasn't the same as recovery. Financial security couldn't replace trust, and federal justice couldn't heal personal betrayal. Agent Torrin walked me to the elevator when we finished. "The media attention will die down in a few days," he said. "Find somewhere quiet to wait it out." "Any recommendations?" "Somewhere without storage facilities." I laughed, despite everything. "I'll keep that in mind." The ride down to the lobby gave me time to think about next steps. Divorce attorney, asset inventory, temporary housing while the legal proceedings played out. The practical aspects of dismantling a life that had been built on lies. The lobby was busier now, filled with federal employees and visitors conducting legitimate business. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by criminal spouses and fraudulent marriages. I envied them. Outside, the media circus had expanded. More news vans, more reporters, more cameras pointed at anyone entering or leaving the federal building. I slipped out a side entrance and walked 6 blocks to my car, parked in a municipal garage where the reporters hadn't thought to look. The drive home took me past the storage facility where everything had started to unravel. Unit 247 was sealed with federal evidence tape now, its secrets extracted and cataloged for prosecution. The coffee shop across the street looked busy with the lunch crowd, customers who had no idea they were eating sandwiches at ground zero of a federal investigation. I thought about all the hours I'd spent in that back booth, watching my wife conduct her criminal business while I documented evidence for her eventual prosecution. The methodical destruction of my marriage, one photograph at a time. Had there been a moment when I could have chosen differently? A point where confrontation might have led to confession and cooperation instead of arrest and prosecution? Maybe. But that would have required trusting someone who had already proven herself untrustworthy. Someone who had been lying to me for months, maybe years, about fundamental aspects of her life. The affair with Kian changed everything. Fraud was business, but adultery was personal. She hadn't just stolen money. She'd stolen time, attention, and emotional energy that should have belonged to our marriage. The Tuesday visits weren't just about laundering money. They were about maintaining a relationship with the man she'd chosen over me, the man she'd helped fake his own demise for insurance money. How long had she been planning to leave? Had the fraud been an exit strategy, a way to accumulate enough money to disappear with Kian once the heat died down? Or had she planned to maintain both relationships indefinitely, living a double life funded by insurance fraud? I'd never know for sure. The only person who could answer those questions was sitting in federal custody, and I had no intention of visiting her there. By the time I reached my neighborhood, the media circus had grown to 8 news vans. Reporters stood in clusters on my lawn, their cameras ready to capture my return. I drove past without stopping, circling the block twice before parking 3 streets away. Getting back into my house required another creative route through backyards and side streets. I felt like a criminal in my own neighborhood, sneaking around to avoid cameras and questions I didn't want to answer. Inside, the house felt different again. Not just empty, but contaminated by knowledge I couldn't unknow. Every room held memories that were now suspect. Every piece of furniture might have been purchased with stolen money. Every shared moment might have been a performance designed to maintain her cover story. I poured another bourbon and sat in my office, surrounded by the evidence files that had destroyed my marriage. 6 months of investigation, reduced to manila folders and federal case numbers. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more media attention, more legal complications. Tonight, I just wanted to sit quietly in the ruins of my life and try to figure out what came next. The phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but the caller ID showed my lawyer's number. Finn? It's Tom Bradley. I've been following the news coverage. Tom, I was going to call you tomorrow about divorce proceedings. That's why I'm calling. We need to move fast on asset protection. If the feds are seizing property purchased with fraud proceeds, we need to establish clear ownership of everything else. How fast? Emergency filing tomorrow morning. I'll need complete financial records going back 5 years, plus documentation of any separate property you owned before the marriage. I'll get you everything. And Finn? Don't talk to any reporters. Anything you say can be used in the civil asset forfeiture proceedings. After Tom hung up, I started gathering financial records. Bank statements, investment accounts, property deeds, insurance policies. The paper trail of a 12-year marriage that was about to be dissected by federal investigators and divorce attorneys. Outside, the news vans maintained their vigil, waiting for any development worth broadcasting. Inside, I sorted through the debris of a life that had been built on lies I'd been too trusting to see. The unsigned anniversary card still sat on the kitchen counter, a reminder of the marriage that had ended with federal arrest warrants instead of romantic gestures. I threw it in the trash and poured another bourbon. Tomorrow would be complicated enough without sentimental reminders of what I'd lost. 3 weeks after the birthday party arrests, the federal courthouse buzzed with activity as the first wave of plea negotiations began. I sat in the gallery watching my wife's attorney argue for reduced charges in exchange for cooperation, her voice echoing off marble walls that had witnessed decades of similar proceedings. Rina looked smaller in her orange jumpsuit, her designer confidence replaced by the hollow expression of someone whose carefully constructed world had collapsed in a single evening. She hadn't looked at me once during the hearing, her attention focused entirely on the judge who held her future in his hands. Mrs. Harlow has provided substantial assistance to the government's investigation, her attorney continued. She's identified additional assets, provided detailed financial records, and offered complete cooperation in the prosecution of her co-conspirators. Co-conspirators. That's what they called Kian now, the man she'd been visiting every Tuesday for romance and money laundering, the man she'd helped fake his demise for $4 million in insurance proceeds. Judge Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair and no patience for financial crimes, consulted the plea agreement with the expression of someone reading a grocery list. The government recommends 8 years federal prison in exchange for Mrs. Harlow's cooperation, she said. Is that correct, Agent Torrin? Drake stood at the prosecution table, his federal authority lending weight to every word. Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Harlow's cooperation has been substantial and ongoing. 8 years. I tried to process the number, but it felt abstract, like a weather forecast for a distant city. 8 years of federal prison for the woman who had shared my bed for 12 years, who had built a criminal enterprise while I slept beside her, trusting and oblivious. And Mr. Marin's plea agreement? Judge Morrison continued. 12 years, Your Honor. Mr. Marin was the primary architect of the insurance fraud scheme. 12 years for Kian, 8 for Rina, and probably 2 for June when her hearing came up next week. The complete destruction of a criminal conspiracy, measured in decades of federal incarceration. Judge Morrison accepted both plea agreements with the efficiency of someone who had seen similar cases countless times. Financial crimes, federal sentences, families destroyed by greed and poor judgment. Sentencing is scheduled for 6 weeks from today, she announced. The defendants will remain in federal custody pending sentencing. The hearing ended with the sound of handcuffs and shuffling feet as Rina was led back to her cell. She still didn't look at me, her attention focused on some point beyond the courtroom walls, as if she could will herself somewhere else entirely. I walked outside into October sunshine that felt too bright for the circumstances. The media attention had died down over the past 3 weeks, replaced by newer scandals and more recent arrests. My 15 minutes of fame as the FBI husband who caught his criminal wife had been replaced by someone else's tragedy. Agent Torrin caught up with me on the courthouse steps, his expression mixing professional satisfaction with personal concern. "How are you holding up?" he asked. 8 years seems like a long time, I said. It's a fair sentence for the crimes. She could have gotten 15 if she hadn't cooperated. I know. I'm not questioning the justice of it. I'm just trying to process the reality. We walked toward the parking garage in comfortable silence. Drake understood the complexity of my situation. Professional satisfaction at seeing justice served, personal devastation at watching my marriage end in federal court. "The asset forfeiture hearing is next week," he said. "You should probably be there." "What are they taking?" "The beach house, definitely. Rina's car, most of the furniture and jewelry purchased in the past 2 years, the business assets from her design studio." "What about the main house?" "That's complicated. You owned it before the marriage, but the renovations were paid for with fraud proceeds. They'll probably force a sale and keep a percentage. So I'd lose my home along with everything else. The house I'd bought with my FBI salary, contaminated by renovations funded with insurance fraud money." "Any idea what percentage?" 60, maybe 70%. Depends on how much of the renovation costs can be traced to fraudulent funds. I tried to calculate what that meant financially. The house was worth about $400,000. If the government kept 70%, I'd walk away with maybe $120,000. Enough to start over, but not enough to maintain the life I'd been living. "There's something else," Drake said as we reached my car. "Kian's cooperation has uncovered additional crimes: money laundering, tax evasion, Possibly more insurance fraud from before he met Rina. How much more? We're looking at a conspiracy that goes back at least 5 years. Kian was running insurance scams in 3 different states before he faked his demise. And Rina? Clean before she met him. This was her first venture into criminal activity. That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. She'd chosen crime when she chose Kian, trading our marriage for a relationship with a career criminal who specialized in insurance fraud. I drove home through streets that felt increasingly unfamiliar. 3 weeks of media attention had changed how people looked at me. Some showed sympathy for the betrayed husband, others displayed suspicion, wondering how an FBI agent could live with a criminal for months without knowing. The house felt empty in ways that had nothing to do with Rina's absence. The federal asset seizure team had already removed most of the expensive furniture, leaving behind only items that predated the fraud or couldn't be directly connected to criminal proceeds. My office remained intact, along with the kitchen table, the living room couch, and the bedroom furniture from our early years together. Everything else was gone, creating spaces that echoed with absence. I poured bourbon and sat at the kitchen table where we'd eaten breakfast together for 12 years. How many mornings had she sat across from me, planning criminal activities while I read the newspaper and drank coffee, trusting and unaware? The phone rang, interrupting my brooding. Tom Bradley, my divorce attorney, with updates on the proceedings. The divorce will be finalized next month, he said. Rina's attorney isn't contesting anything. She's focused entirely on minimizing her federal sentence. What about property division? You keep what's left after asset forfeiture. She keeps her federal prison sentence. It's not complicated when one spouse is a convicted felon. Alimony? Hard to pay alimony from federal prison. Besides, she'll owe millions in restitution to the insurance companies. Any money she earns for the next 20 years will go toward paying that back. So she'd leave prison broke and unemployable, her professional reputation destroyed along with her freedom. The complete collapse of a life that had seemed successful just 3 weeks ago. What about me? I asked. Professionally, I mean. You're clean. The FBI investigation confirmed you had no knowledge of the criminal activity. If anything, your cooperation enhanced your reputation in law enforcement circles. That was something, at least. My professional integrity remained intact, even if my personal life lay in ruins. After Tom hung up, I walked through the half-empty house, cataloging what remained of 12 years of marriage. The wedding photos were gone, along with most of the furniture and decorative items. What remained felt like archaeological evidence of a relationship that had existed before everything went wrong. I found myself in the garage, looking at tools and equipment that had survived the federal seizure, basic items that predated the fraud, untainted by criminal proceeds. A circular saw from 2015, a drill set from 2017, hand tools that had built legitimate projects for legitimate clients. Maybe I could go back to construction work, physical labor that produced tangible results, honest work that couldn't be contaminated by hidden agendas or secret relationships. The phone rang again. This time it was Faye, Rina's mother, calling from the assisted living facility where she'd moved after losing the beach house. Finn, I wanted to thank you. Thank me? For stopping her before it got worse. For making sure she faced consequences for what she did. I'm not sure thanks are necessary. They are. I raised her to be better than this. When she chose crime over family, she stopped being the daughter I knew. Faye's voice carried the weight of a mother's disappointment, the particular pain of watching a child choose destruction over redemption. She could have confessed, Faye continued, could have cooperated from the beginning, minimized the damage. Instead, she chose to keep lying until you forced the truth. I'm sorry it came to this. So am I, but I'm not sorry she got caught. After Faye hung up, I sat in my garage surrounded by honest tools and thought about choices. Rina had chosen crime over marriage, deception over truth, Kian over me. Every Tuesday for months, she'd chosen to maintain her criminal relationship instead of ending it. I'd chosen investigation over confrontation, evidence over emotion, justice over forgiveness. 6 months of surveillance that ended with federal arrests instead of private reconciliation. Had there been another way? Could I have chosen differently and achieved a better outcome? Maybe. But that would have required trusting someone who had already proven herself untrustworthy. Someone who had been lying to me about fundamental aspects of her life for months, possibly years. The Tuesday visits weren't just criminal meetings. They were romantic encounters with the man she'd chosen over me, the man she'd helped fake his demise for money they planned to enjoy together. Every choice had consequences. Her choices had led to federal prison. My choices had led to justice and solitude. I could live with solitude. I couldn't have lived with continued deception. The sun was setting when I finally went back inside, casting long shadows through windows that no longer had expensive curtains to filter the light. The house felt different in the gathering darkness, less like a home and more like a temporary shelter. Tomorrow would bring more legal proceedings, more paperwork, more questions about asset division and restitution payments. The slow, methodical process of dismantling a marriage that had been built on lies I'd been too trusting to see. But tonight, for the first time in months, I knew exactly where my wife was spending her evening. Federal custody was surprisingly reliable that way. I poured another bourbon and raised it in a toast to the empty house, to honest work and truthful relationships, to whatever came next after everything fell apart. To Tuesday evenings, I said aloud, and to never wondering again. The bourbon burned pleasantly as it went down, warming the cold spaces where trust used to live. Outside, the storage facility's security lights maintained their silent vigil over Unit 247, now empty of its secrets and its occupants. Justice had been served. The criminals were in custody. The investigation was complete. Now I just had to figure out what to do with the rest of my life.